It did a separation demonstration. Those solar panels that you see there on the side of the spacecraft that are unfurling here on this animation, they are about 10 meters or 32.8 feet in length and have a total area of about 37.7 square meters or about 405.8 square feet. They'll produce about 9.2 kilowatts of power, which will power the satellite for its nominal lifetime of 15 years in operation on orbit. In order to help keep its position, this particular spacecraft also uses xenon gas-powered Hall effect propulsion motors, or HALE thrusters, for those in-orbit maneuvering. It's an electric propulsion system developed by TÜBİTAK Uzay, which translated from Turkish is the Space Technologies Research Institute of the Scientific and Technological Research Institution of Turkey. It's an advisory agency to the country's Supreme Council for Science and Technology. And again, will be the operators of this particular satellite once it's on orbit. Taking a look back here at the pad as we are about 10 seconds away from the start of the so-called big vent. The visual beginning of the process of SpaceX conditioning those feed lines ahead of second stage LOX load, which is now getting underway right about on time. Appreciate our friend Chuck Briggs for providing this great view of the Falcon 9 rocket from the Cape side. First stage booster, tail number 1076 in the SpaceX fleet, before it gets ready to add a 15th notch in its proverbial belt. This booster began flying back in late 2022, launching from Launch Complex 39A. This was the Commercial Resupply Services Mission, or CRS-26, sending a cargo Dragon spacecraft up to the International Space Station. On board at the time was more than 7,700 pounds of cargo and science experiments for the crew that was on board at the ISS at the time. The second launch of this booster was on January 10th of 2023. This was the OneWeb Flight 16 mission, the second of 3 dedicated launches of the OneWeb constellation. After Russia invaded Ukraine, of course, OneWeb lost the Soyuz rocket as a launch vehicle. It decided to buy 3 flights from SpaceX and 2 from India to send up its remaining satellites, which are manufactured not too far away from where we're sitting right now, over on Merritt Island at the Airbus OneWeb satellite facility. It was followed by this first Starlink mission for this booster, Starlink 6-1. Also notable because it was the first batch of the Starlink V2 mini satellites that were sent up to low Earth orbit. That was followed up on April 7th when this booster supported the Intelsat 40E launch. The communications satellite also had a hosted payload for NASA called the Tropospheric Emissions Monitoring of Pollution, or TEMPO, instrument. This is a UV visible spectrometer that monitors air pollutants hourly across North America. It can measure pollutants from an area as small as 4 square miles.
40 in Florida. Today's launch marks SpaceX's 6th.
During the daytime, it can measure things like ozone, sulfur dioxide, formaldehyde. At nighttime, this can also track light pollution. Moving on, launches 5 through 8 were Starlink flights. Those were 6-3 on May 19th, 6-6 on July 24th, 6-14 on September 9th, 6-21 on October 5th. The next flight, number 9, carried the pair of O3B mPOWER satellites, numbers 5 and 6, up to medium Earth orbit on behalf of Luxembourg-based company SES. 10th launch was the Ovzon 3 satellite on behalf of the company Ovzon. That mission was on January 3rd, 2024. Launch 11 was a batch of 23 Starlink satellites on the Starlink 6-40 mission, lifting off from Slick 40 on Leap Day this year, February 29th. That was followed up by the launch of the Eutelsat 36D satellite for French satellite operator Eutelsat on March 30th. And most recently, it sent up Starlink satellites on the Starlink 6-54 mission on April 28th and 6-64 on June 1st. Majority of that is made up by the Falcon 9's first stage, bottom two-thirds of the rocket. And as we just learned, this particular booster has flown 14 times before, looking for number 15 today. At the base of the first stage are 9 Merlin 1D engines, which burn a combination of rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen and produce 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage booster on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. As we continue up the rocket, above the first stage is the inner stage, although I will pause and note for reference right now it is T-minus 7 minutes, 2 seconds and counting, and SpaceX at now is beginning the engine chill down process, where they flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps on those aforementioned Merlin 1D engines to protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. Coming back to this inner stage, this is a composite structure which consists of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. In the image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see deployable hypersonic grid fins. These titanium winglets provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere tail first like a big old dart. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage, and at first stage main engine cutoff, high pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Second stage engine nozzles also housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, as we cruise on into T-minus 6 minutes counting, the upper stage of the Falcon 9, powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVac engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight to place the TurkSat 6A satellite into its intended orbit. Because this is sending that satellite up to GEO, though, it will not have a third burn to deorbit it as it would normally, but instead it will head to a graveyard orbit safely out of the way of those geostationary satellites. Finally, above the second stage are those payload fairings, which are currently encapsulating the TurkSat 6A satellite. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material, and they are 13.1 meters, or 43 feet tall, 5.2 meters, or 17.1 feet in diameter. Fairing halves will be recovered a little further downrange from where the booster lands on the drone ship, and they gently splash down under parachutes. As we are coming back to focus on the rocket itself, the mission, we're T-minus 4 minutes, 43 seconds and counting. In just a few seconds, as you see from the SpaceX feed here in the big box, that's strung back, now reclining just a short distance away from the Falcon 9 rocket. We're now a little more than 3 minutes away from liftoff. Coming up in about 15 seconds, the first stage liquid oxygen loading process should be wrapping up. I want to thank the more than 13,000 of you who are watching with us live this afternoon or evening. Appreciate your patience as we watch SpaceX and the 45th Weather Squadron monitor the weather conditions and get to this point where they're preparing to lift off in less than 3 minutes now. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button to allow some more folks to find their way into this live coverage, as we're just about 2.5 minutes away now. Briefly want to thank Jim Edgar for a very generous $50 super chat. Wonderful to see you again this evening, Jim. Jim says, Lisa B and Jim Edgar watching from Snoqualmie, Washington, along with the cats, Millie, Rex, and Kip. Go SpaceX. Go Turkey. Mel Roberts Herod with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Mel. Saying sure glad to be watching with all of y'all. Hope you're doing well, Mel, whether you're down here with us in the Cocoa Beach area or if you're up in Chicagoland. And lastly, for now, I want to thank Valerie Jones for being a channel member for 7 months, saying thanks for making it possible for this Utah girl to attend every launch I want. Spaceflight now rocks. Well, thank you for your ongoing support, Valerie. As we're about a minute and a half away from liftoff, we're going to go ahead and focus on the rocket here. The venting you're seeing are the ground gas closeouts. Falcon 9 also now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. That combination of RP-1 or rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen. T-minus 1 minute and counting. The call the Falcon 9 is in startup. We're waiting for the final go for launch call. And we've got that go for launch from the SpaceX launch director now. T-minus 25 seconds and counting. 20 seconds. 15 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket, launching the TurkSat 6A satellite. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Now 30 seconds into flight, let's listen to the roar of those 920 engines. About a minute and a half into flight. Falcon 9 now passing through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Got some views from our friend Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions here. Been a little tricky to track through the clouds here. That's why we've got our crews spread out across the Space Coast to bring you the best possible views. Again, the clouds making it a bit tricky today. We're doing our level best. We're looking at a few different events in fairly rapid succession now as we cross the 2-minute mark. T plus 2 minutes and 32 seconds will be first stage main engine cutoff, followed 3 seconds later by stage separation. Then the second stage engine will ignite at T plus 2 minutes 43 seconds, setting up for the fairings to deploy at about 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Nice view of our little planet there from the SpaceX onboard cameras.
Confirmed.
And back ignition.
Some good callouts from SpaceX, as you can see those events happening on screen here. Given the amount of cloud cover, it may be difficult to see that first stage entry burn. If, and I'll stress if, we are able to catch views of that, though, we will, of course, bring those to you. Given the amount of cloud cover in the area, though, it may be a little tricky, but we will, again, do our level best here. Now about 3.5 minutes into flight. Fairings have separated. The next milestone coming up will be the first stage entry burn, beginning at T plus 6 minutes and 16 seconds. You see on the far left-hand side of your screen, appears like one of those fairing halves still in view, just drifting out of view there. SpaceX will use its recovery vessel Bob to try to scoop those up out of the Atlantic Ocean. It and the other recovery vessel, Doug, were named after former NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, the duo who flew the Demo 2 mission for SpaceX up to the International Space Station back in May of 2020. Just as a quick point of housekeeping, you can see our clock in the top right-hand corner of your screen, slightly different than what we're seeing from SpaceX there on the center of your screen. Our clock is in real time, and what's coming in from SpaceX is on a slight delay, so we'll call out the events mostly in real time for the ones that we'll be able to see from the ground, hopefully with the start of that entry burn. Then we'll mostly focus on the SpaceX clock there, since the events will be visible only from the onboard cameras at that point. We're now less than a minute away from the start of that first stage entry burn in real time. Looking up through the inner stage on the Falcon 9 booster. That's the box on the left-hand side of your screen. On the right-hand side, you're looking at the Merlin vacuum engine. The reason you're seeing the viewpoint on the right-hand side toggle back and forth is because it allows SpaceX engineers to monitor both sides of that Merlin vacuum engine and ensure that it's continuing a good and even burn. We're now coming up, speaking of burns, on the start of that entry burn in just about 5 seconds in real time. So our Pete Carstens is scanning the skies, hoping to catch a glimpse of that. Again, as you can see, there's a lot of cloud cover, so may not be visible from the ground here. You see the start of that entry burn there on the SpaceX delay. In real time, the entry burn has begun, so unfortunately, the clouds proved to be just a little bit too much for us here on the ground today, but fortunately we've got those onboard camera views provided by SpaceX. With the conclusion of that entry burn, you can see the speedometer on that first stage booster has dropped quite a bit as the altitude continues to plummet as well. SpaceX essentially slamming on the brakes with that first stage booster, also being aided by atmospheric drag. The hypersonic grid fins that you see there help provide steering and stability as that booster is making its way down towards the drone ship. Just read the instructions. coming through the clouds here, you'll occasionally see a couple of bursts in between those grid fins. Those are the cold gas thrusters, which help adjust the attitude of the first stage booster. As we're hearing from SpaceX, the fairing halves are also have quite a bit of life under them. One half has flown for, or is flying for a 16th time, the other flying for a 10th time. So if you can believe it, one of the fairing halves slightly older than the booster that it caught a ride with. Now T plus 8 minutes 15 seconds into flight. See the Merlin vacuum engine concluding its first burn here. Set up the start of the landing burn momentarily. Some views of the TurkSat 6A satellite here. And while it was the views from on board the Falcon 9 first stage were lost momentarily, you could see visually from the drone ship cameras the first stage booster down on the drone ship just to read the instructions. A little bit of a soggy deck there, so some of the stormy conditions that we were seeing here at the Cape also present out there near the drone ship recovery site. I had to take a moment to note the SpaceX mission stats as they currently stand. This was the 15th launch of this particular first stage booster, tail number 1076 in the SpaceX fleet. This was SpaceX's 353rd Falcon 9 launch to date. We'll get to the 500s eventually. This was the 68th Falcon 9 launch of 2024. The 296th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 69th orbital launch of 2024, including the Falcon Heavy launch, sending up the NOAA weather satellite called GOES-U. And as a matter of fact, just earlier today, just pulling this up, making sure I've got my dates right. Yes, officially, the GOES-U satellite has reached its planned geostationary orbit at 22,236 miles above the Earth. And so it has shifted from being GOES-U as now officially GOES-19. So congrats to NOAA for reaching that milestone. Again, that was launched on the most recent Falcon Heavy rocket launch. This is SpaceX's 120th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 196th orbital launch from SpaceX from Pad 40, and the 251st overall orbital launch from this particular pad. On its progress towards a goal of 144 missions or more on the year. Notch 69 so far, including the Falcon Heavy. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 86th landing of a booster on the drone ship, just read the instructions. This was SpaceX's 257th overall drone ship landing and the 328th booster landing to date. Finally, some industry stats. This was the 50th launch from Florida this year, the 73rd from U.S. soil. This was the 81st orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company, and the 131st orbital launch around the world, including 3 launch mishaps. Taking a look at the orbital pie chart, got the U.S. now at There you can see that Merlin vacuum engine reigniting. Again, this burn will last. Talking about the capabilities of that satellite you see right there. Getting ready to deploy in just over a minute from now. Looking at the SpaceX feed, we are now just about 10 seconds away from deployment of that satellite. We'll have deployed by now in real time, though. And there it goes. A successful deployment of the TurkSat 6A satellite, the first satellite manufactured and operated from the country of Turkey. Again, this was the 69th orbital launch from SpaceX this year, 68 using a Falcon 9 rocket.